and welcome to GameSack. We all know that SNK made the NeoGeo, the most powerful console of all time. At least at the time. I mean, it could play arcade games at home. Can you imagine scaling and real voices in your own house? What an incredible time it was to be alive back then. But what was SNK like before the NeoGeo? Well, they were founded in 1978 as Shin Nihon Kikaku before eventually rebranding to simply SNK. So let's take a look at a wide variety of games they published throughout the years. First up is Osmo Wars from 1979. This is a vertically scrolling shooter which is pretty incredible for the time. Usually back then you were stuck to the bottom of a static screen. You're still locked to the bottom here, though the screen gives the appearance of scrolling. Get hit 3 times and it's game over. What's cool is that there are different levels or stages in this one, which is a first for video games at the time. Next is Sasuke vs. Commander in 1980. This is an interesting take on Space Invader style gameplay. You're shooting all of the ninjas down as they come at you, throwing shuriken. If you hit a ninja, he will slowly fall to the ground. You can shoot their shurikens away, but you can only move out of the way of the falling ninjas. Eventually, you'll get to a bonus stage where you need to avoid this guy's blasts and shoot him. And that's pretty much the premise of this one. Here's Fantasy from 1981. This is a very ambitious game. Nearly every level is unique. Your girl is kidnapped, and of course you need to get her back. Once you rescue her, she of course gets kidnapped again right away. These levels can be tough, but they're definitely winnable and fun. I like this one, which reminds me of another arcade game I loved called Kangaroo. Anyone remember Kangaroo? Or how about this stage which plays Funky Town? This was also the first game ever to offer a continue feature to let you keep trying from where you left off, as long as you keep paying. Here's Vanguard from 1981. This was developed by Tosei and published by SNK, but I'm including this here anyway. In this shooter, you have 4 buttons to fire in 4 different directions. When the game begins, you're greeted with the theme from Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. And also Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek The Motion Picture, which came out in 1979. As the game scrolls along, eventually it'll change directions, which of course increases the difficulty. This was definitely interesting in its time. Here's Vanguard II from 1984. This sequel is completely different. It features an overhead view, and it was possibly inspired by the original Thunder Force game from Technosoft, which had come out the previous year. You have guns to destroy enemies that are flying around, and missiles to destroy pods and stuff below you. You fly around and destroy 10 pods, and then you're allowed to attack the central core. Do that, and then you go to the next stage, where you now have to shoot down 20 pods before attacking the core. Some nice parallax scrolling shows how we're advancing in technology during the course of this fine episode. Tank, or SNK III, came out in 1985. As you can see, this is a scrolling game where you control a tank. You need to make it across a large map and defeat the swastika at the very end. This one uses a rotary joystick, the first SNK game to do so. Pressing the joystick makes the tank move in that direction, while rotating it will aim your fire in that direction. It's like a twin stick setup, just more clumsy. SNK would use these controls in many of their future arcade games. You have a life bar, and you can pick up icons to restore some of that life. This game is pretty fun, but once you get more than, say, 25% of the way in, some of the enemies will take out your entire life bar with a single hit, even if it's full. So bring plenty of quarters to continue. There was a sequel exclusively on the NES called Iron Tank in 1988. It plays basically the same way, just adapted to work with the NES controller. The graphics are pretty good for an SNK game on the NES. They've added a subscreen so you can manage your weapon and see what route you're on via the map. The sound and music are similar to the original game from 3 years prior. This is Alpha Mission from 1985. It's a vertical shooter where one button shoots flying enemies and the other shoots ground targets. I've never really understood exactly how this game works. You collect a bunch of different letters that seem to have little to no effect. It seems overly convoluted for no reason whatsoever. In 1987, it was ported to the NES. It plays the same way, only the graphics and audio have been scaled back. Even the fun has been scaled back a little, and that's not a good thing. And of course, in 1991, Alpha Mission 2 came to the NeoGeo. It still doesn't really make any sense to me how it works, but it is a bit more fun because you at least think that something is happening. The music is pretty good as well, which helps it to almost be enjoyable. Now let's take a look at the very first run and gun game ever made. Well, actually it's not even close. Ikari Warriors came out in 1986. This is an overhead run and gun which uses the rotary joysticks. This game would be awesome with twin sticks. They tried to license Rambo, but they couldn't get him, which is why the character looks like Rambo. You can get into tanks, which makes it even more fun to mow down the enemies. Just be sure to get out of it right away when you hear the alarm, otherwise you will die. This game also came to the NES, like literally the next month, so it was being designed at the same time as the arcade. It was made by Micronix, who did not understand the NES hardware very well. It can be a bit choppy, flickery, and slow, but of course after just playing the arcade, this is kind of to be expected. It's still fun to get into a tank and mow enemies down though. Victory Road, also known as Ikari II, came out that same year, amazingly. It now takes place in space! It's very strange that they took this approach with the sequel, but I can appreciate it, I suppose. This one even talks to you.
Warriors, show some guts! You can't escape me! Come get me if you can!
This one is also no cakewalk. Instead of a tank, you can get armor. Sometimes you get sucked into a hole where you need to go down and take out a big bad guy alien. I like the massive flame shot that you can get. Also, your ammunition isn't limited like it is in the first game. It came to the NES as Ikari Warriors 2 Victory Road in 1988. This one's a big step back from the arcade, but still a step up over the original game on the NES. You only have one life and no continues without cheating, which isn't very cool. You do have a life bar though. You still get sucked into holes, but down here you have to move a reticle around on the screen to hit a moving target as many times as you can. Although I like this version more than the first one on the NES, I still don't really recommend it. Athena also came out in 1986. In this one, your clothes fall off and you start with no weapon. As you bash enemies, weapons and armor eventually appear for you to collect and use. This will help your offense and defense. Some of the weapons are pretty fun, but it's tough to keep the good ones because you'll often get a worse one that you can't avoid picking up. The game's not bad, but you get set back to the beginning of the stage when you die, which makes it a little less fun than I think it could be. The graphics are fairly primitive for a 1986 arcade game. The next year, it came out for the NES. This was the first time this game showed up in the US. It plays the same, but even more primitive. Primitive for a 1987 NES game for sure. Again, it plays fine, just be prepared to get set back pretty far when you die. Psycho Soldier was released in 1987. This is another game that stars Athena, but it takes place in the future. While still a bit primitive for the time, it's definitely less so than the first Athena game. This one is almost a cross between a platformer and a horizontal shooter. The scrolling is forced, and you can jump and descend to platforms with the up and down directions. Just zap enemies and collect stuff, and well, that's pretty much it. At the end of the stage, you need to collapse a screen-high building, which is basically your boss encounter. The game sometimes even sings you a song. Not a great song, mind you. The English lyrics do leave a little bit to be desired.
Fire, fire, like the soldier. Fire, fire, like the soldier.
Still though, it is impressive that it's in here, same with the amount of digitized sound everywhere else in this game. Of course, Athena would be a selectable character in all of the King of Fighters games. She definitely gets around.
She's just a little girl with power inside, burning bright. You better hide if you are bad. She'll catch you. She'll read your mind and find if you believe in right or wrong.
Bermuda Triangle is a 1987 game. This is a documentary on exactly what happens in the Bermuda Triangle. It's a vertical shooter where your ship is gigantic, making it hard to avoid taking hits. As a result, you have a life bar. You can collect E icons to make it bigger. Once it gets so big, you change form, and you can even do this a few times. This makes you more powerful, but as you lose life, you'll change back into your weaker forms. Most enemies take a lot of hits, even in your stronger forms. Each stage scrolls up to the top, then scrolls backwards to the beginning for some reason, and then back to the top again for the boss fight. Also, this game talks a lot. That's pretty cool.
Pick one. Power up.
Guerrilla War is another 1987 game. This is basically Ikari Warriors again, just with a fresh coat of paint. You have the same rotary control joysticks, you can still get in tanks, etc, etc. However, this time you can rescue hostages. You've got to be careful though, as you can shoot them, and that'll make you lose points. You also have some cool weapons to pick up. You're actually playing as Che Guevara, I'm not kidding, and if you play 2 players, the second player is Fidel Castro. The biggest problem with this one though is that you're forced to play as a human instead of a gorilla. Seriously, what the hell is in the title? I want to play as a gorilla! Overall, I'd say that this one is much better than Ikari Warriors, at least the first one. Guerrilla War came to the NES in 1989. This one's even better than the arcade in my opinion. Yeah, the visuals have been downgraded, but they still look great for the system. There are fewer enemies on screen, so it feels less overwhelming, but they still give you unlimited continue, so you can walk right through this one if you want. This feature would be a staple on the NeoGeo. This one has bosses that weren't in the arcade. And even new levels too. The arcade was way too weak to do this amazing Mode 7 rotation. The NES is great at Mode 7. There's still no gorillas here, and that really pisses me off! Anyway, check this one out. It's way better than the Ikari Warriors games on the console. '87 graced the world with Touchdown Fever. This game was designed by people who had only had football described to them briefly from a guy sitting next to them in a bathroom stall. It uses the rotary control joysticks and it's weird. Fortunately, the rotation isn't for running, it's just throwing or kicking. You can't pick your plays, the ball is snapped automatically, so you better be ready. The most exciting thing about this one is that the voice in the game sounds like the same guy that did Mike Ditka football in the Genesis.
First down! First down! All right! Touchdown!
A year later, Touchdown Fever 2 came to the arcades. This is mostly the same, but now you can choose your plays. The music is updated a little and the voice announcer is much more enthusiastic.
The snap. He drops back. Incomplete!
Touchdown Fever was released on the NES in 1990, but it was made in 1988. This plays a bit more like the second game. You have a tiny amount of plays that you can choose from, but it's better than none. The music is decent as you play, but there are no voices. The graphics are quite flickery, which of course is to be expected. Most people will probably prefer Tecmo Bowl for an 8-bit football game, but this could be much worse. Time Soldiers also came out in 1987. This one's from Alpha Denshi, who would help SNK design the NeoGeo hardware and would later be acquired by SNK, so I'm counting this game. The control setup is identical to Ikari Warriors, but in this game you need to travel through time to rescue your comrades. Just slip into the time travel portals that are scattered throughout each level. The game will let you know which area your pal is in. This one's a much more enjoyable run and gun than Ikari Warriors or even Victory Road. The graphics are nice and the concept is fun. This one was ported to the Sega Master System by Alpha Denshi themselves. It's okay. The graphics are decent for the console, but the sound is pretty weak compared to other Master System titles. Still though, it's not a bad game. It's worth pointing out that a lot of the games I'm covering in this episode are available on the SNK 40th Anniversary Collection available for consoles, and it came out in 2018 and 2019. Not all of them in this episode are on that though, but still, if you want to play a lot of the games I'm covering, it might be worth picking that up. It was handled by Digital Eclipse, so you know it's going to be done pretty damn well. Anyway, back to the games. 1988 brought us P.O.W. Prisoners of War. This one's a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you break out of your cell and fight your way towards freedom. You have a punch button as well as a kick. You can also jump and jump kick. As a game, it's pretty slow, stiff, and your character has limited reach. But you gotta keep in mind that this was before beat-em-ups were refined with Final Fight the following year, so all of this can be forgiven. Otherwise, it's pretty fun. You can pick up weapons and use them for a short amount of time. The graphics are pretty good, though they do lack any parallax scrolling. Even the music can be pretty good at times. This was a good arcade game for the era. P.O.W. Prisoners of War came out for the NES the next year. They should have called this Prisoner of War, singular, since this game is now single player only. Other than that though, it plays quite well. You have one button for punch and the other kicks. Press both of them at the same time to jump, and this automatically performs a jump kick. You can also hold the punch button briefly for a backhand attack. Overall, I'd say it feels less slow than the arcade. The graphics have been downgraded, of course, but they still look good, and the game is fairly faithful to the original in its layout. There's no continues in this version though, but there is a cheat to start with 21 lives. We can't forget Lee Trevino's Fighting Golf in 1988. For an arcade golf game at the time, this one plays okay. Your swing meter is super fast, so you gotta be quick. This in turn can make the putting very challenging. Still, it's all something that you can get moderately used to. The graphics sometimes make it difficult to judge perspective, so you need to keep your eye on the overhead map instead. Unfortunately, there's no fighting in this game like the title suggests. I mean, look at this explosion. There should be car chases, rocket launchers. These are things that define Lee Trevino. The music is pleasant, and you'll probably wish that your local golf course pumped it over their loudspeakers as you play in real life. This came to the NES the very same year. It's mostly the same, just worse. The music stops playing after you hit the ball for some reason. Lee Trevino still doesn't get into any fights in this version. Pfft, that's just sad. Sky Soldiers is another one developed by Alpha Denshi. It came out in 1988. This is basically a spiritual follow-up to Time Soldiers, except in the sky. As you can probably see, this is a vertical shooter. Before each stage, you choose your weapons, which are your secondary weapons. Also, before each stage, you travel through time. You don't need to worry about any specific paths like you did in Time Soldiers, it just all happens on its own. Sadly, there's not a lot of variety in the visuals and even less in the music. Other than that though, it plays smoothly. There was no home port for this one. A more interesting 1988 vertical shooter is Chopper 1. Or is it Chopper I? I don't know, who cares? It's your typical shooter where you can collect a few power-ups, if you live that long. You also have a couple of bomb attacks you can do with the other button. You can even collect and store different bomb attacks to use. Naturally, the stage ends with a boss. The stages and the sound are definitely not boring. I like how you can shoot people on the ground, and boy oh boy do they deserve it. Also, sometimes the enemy will catch you in a net which prevents you from firing. Like I said, this one is more interesting, but it's also a hell of a lot harder. You can continue, but I'm honestly surprised that the game allows this, or even allows more than one life per continue. It would probably be easier with 2 players as the enemy would have something else to target instead of just you.
Look out! Enemy coming!
Baseball Stars came out exclusively for the NES in 1989. The main appeal to this one is that you can create and name your own team. It's a bit awkward to do, but you can. You can even create and name your own players. It also lets you earn money from your wins and power up your players, which is awesome. The actual baseball game itself is very bare bones, but playable. The customization in this one and the fact that it allowed you to save all this was ahead of its time. The series continued with Baseball Stars Professional on the NeoGeo in 1990. This is exactly like the first game, except not for loser amateurs. Well, they did take all of the Create-A-Team stuff away, as that's a bit beyond the scope of what SNK had in mind for the system. But they could have done it with their memory card option. It is an outstanding game nonetheless.
Play
What
ball!
a day for baseball. Temperatures couldn't be better this afternoon, and we're expecting a big crowd for today's thriller. So let's get started. It's a well-hit ball that should be in there for a single.
Baseball Stars 2 came to the NES in 1992, but it was published by Romstar. You can create a team here, but you can't rename it, nor the players. What's the point? The actual baseball game graphics have changed a bit, but the game itself is still pretty basic. Baseball Stars 2 got a proper version in 1992 on the NeoGeo. Again, this is more arcade action, and it doesn't offer any real customization. But regardless, it's one of the best baseball games ever made, and I will die on that hill.
Great hit!
Gang Wars from Alpha Denshi arrived in 1989. This one's a fairly typical beat-em-up, though certainly not as refined as Final Fight, which came out the same year. The graphics are really nice. I love the bright colors that they used. The artwork looks similar to Alpha's Ninja Combat on the NeoGeo. The jumping and jump kicks are both unwieldy, and you'll probably rarely, if ever, use them. I do like how you can upgrade your character after a stage. There are even short cutscenes between the levels. As with all Alpha Denshi games before the NeoGeo, the music and sound quality is kind of lacking in this one. It's worth a try though. Ikari III: The Rescue came out in 1989. This third entry into the series is now a beat-em-up. This one takes place with an overhead view, which is interesting. Other than the view though, it plays exactly like any other beat-em-up. You're off to rescue the daughter of a presidential candidate. You have a punch, kick, and a jump. You can pick up some items and throw them. Sometimes you can get a gun, which will give you a small taste of the old Ikari Warriors games. Just a small one though. Like many beat-em-ups, this one can get boring rather quickly due to the slow pace and extreme repetition. The lounge music doesn't help keep you excited either. The NES version came out in 1990. This changes a few things around, but it does its best to remain somewhat faithful. The controls are now like the NES version of P.O.W. Prisoners of War, jumping by pressing both buttons at the same time. You generally can't pick up weapons in this one, but sometimes you'll get an icon which is good for a single grenade tosser or something like that. A gun will automatically be given to you for some of the boss fights, and then the game will take it away when you're done. The game moves faster than the arcade, and it's impressive how many enemies are on screen at once. Stage 2 still plays the lounge music, but it sounds more energetic on the NES than it does in the arcade. You could certainly do worse than this one. And now we're getting to the point where SNK was starting to experiment with some of the hardware that would eventually become the NeoGeo, and soon even SNK's first one-on-one fighting game. Is it as good as King of Fighters? Well, stick around and you'll see. Mechanized Attack came out in 1989, just like it says on the title screen here. There are flashing screens in this one, so be warned. That's right, this is a light gun game, and it's a pretty good one. The controller is shaped like an Uzi. It starts off similar to Operation Wolf by blowing away military bad guys in military settings. But in Stage 2, you find out most of the guys you're killing are Terminators. Well, they're mechanized, hence the name of the game. And they're attacking! It's a mechanized attack! You shoot your gun and you can also toss a grenade for a bigger attack, but you don't have very many of those. SNK really stepped up their presentation game in this one. Everything's big and bold and they're scaling everywhere. The hardware here is similar to the NeoGeo, with a 12 MHz 68,000 CPU and a Z80A at 4 MHz running the sound via a Yamaha 2608. Definitely give this one a go when you're at the arcade later today. Mechanized Attack came to the NES in 1990. There's flashing screens in this one as well. This one hasn't appeared on GameSack since way back in episode 10. You remember that episode? You can play it with the Nintendo Zapper, as I'm doing here since I'm a real G. It's a far cry from the arcade in pretty much every aspect, but it's still a good little title for the console here. You shoot the screen with your bullets and press the A button on the controller to throw a grenade at what the Zapper is pointing at. You can even choose your path in this version. The trigger on the Zapper is very resistive, which makes playing it for a long time rather fatiguing, so you might want to try to see if you like it with the controller. I've never tried. In 1989, we got Prehistoric Isle in 1930. Turns out there's an island which still has all sorts of dinosaurs on it. You don't like that one bit, so you set off to kill them all with your 1930s airplane in this horizontal shooter. Islands are for humans, not dinosaurs! You shoot down floating eggs to get power-ups. You can increase the speed of your plane and also the power. This occurs with an option that floats near you, and it can be rotated around your plane with one of the buttons. The option can be in one of 8 different positions, and it will fire off a certain weapon depending on said position. For example, if it's right in front of you, it makes your forward shot much more powerful. If it's below you, it shoots to the ground. Your airplane retains a forward shot at all times. Like all airplanes from 1930, it's not an issue at all to move around in battle underwater. The graphics in this one are pretty nice, with lots of huge dino bosses. The sound is good and the music is okay. Overall, this is a pretty good shooter for 1989. Ten years later, Prehistoric Isle 2 came out on the NeoGeo in the arcades only. You now play as a helicopter. There are no options, you power yourself up directly. You also have a bomb. It also seems to take place in more modern times. You need to rescue people if you can as well. The graphics are all pre-rendered, which you may or may not prefer. The sound here is much more abrasive and annoying. It's a good game, but I think I like the original more. Street Smart also came out in 1989. This is a one-on-one fighting game. As you may have heard, SNK would go on to make a few more one-on-one fighting games after the NeoGeo was out. This one doesn't work exactly like the ones you're used to though. You can move up and down in a stage, just like a beat-em-up. This means that one of your buttons is for jumping. You can also punch and kick. There are very few special attacks and they're not very spectacular. Oh, and you can't choose your character. You have a life bar, and if it runs out, you just get up again and continue the fight with your next life. Your opponent doesn't have a life bar at all. When they start flashing red, that's your cue that they're pretty close to being beaten. You only need to win 1 round per opponent. Once they go down, the ambulance comes and it's off to SNK Hospital for them. After you win, you get yourself a woman. The goal in the game is to have a different woman for each region. You go, boy! Beat the game and get all 8 women. The game is okay and worth playing at least once, I suppose. The graphics are fine, but they're also quite dim. The music is pretty good at least. Street Smart came home to the 16-bit Sega Genesis in 1991 courtesy of Treco. The base game plays the same for the most part, and the graphics are brighter, but they're also smaller and much less detailed. There's less room to move vertically, not that you ever really need to. But now you get to upgrade yourself between each level. There's also a gambling aspect, and you can even bet against yourself in a fight. You still get yourself a woman if you win, but they're all very similar to each other. Beastbusters is another 1989 light gun game. There are no flashing screens in this one. This time, you're shooting down zombies. And what do zombies want to do to you? Eat your brains, maybe? No, don't be stupid. They much rather shoot you, with guns. Everybody knows that's what zombies do. And they are all over the place in this game. It plays just like Mechanized Attack with your main shot as well as a grenade button for various types of grenades that you can get. It uses the same hardware as well, except this one has a Yamaha 2610 sound chip instead. That's the same sound chip that's in the NeoGeo, friends. I'm pretty sure that this game is running on prototype NeoGeo hardware to test it out, similar to Mechanized Attack. Once again, this game is chock full of scaling, even though some of it can be kind of funny looking sometimes. It adds even better artwork than Mechanized Attack with some great use of color, and no flashing screens make it much less annoying to look at. The sound is also more active here with more music. Sadly, this one didn't have a console port in its time, only to computers like the Amiga and Atari ST. I would have loved to see this on the NeoGeo. It's way better than the Super Spy or the like. Give this one a play after you're done playing Mechanized Attack at the arcade later today. In 1998, there was a sequel called Beast Buster's Second Nightmare on the Hyper NeoGeo 64. This is arcade hardware that's more hyper than the dumb old regular NeoGeo, and it's 64 bits, which was all the rage at the time. As you can see, if you can see, this is another light gun shooting game. But now it uses polygons, and it sure looks a lot like the House of the Dead. Granted, the first Beast Busters was kind of a 2D The House of the Dead. You still have your bullets and your grenades here. Sometimes you need to target specific parts of an enemy in time to keep from getting hurt. This game was never ported home, but you can probably find a Hyper NeoGeo 64 arcade system at any of your local 7-Elevens. Then, in 1999, Dark Arms Beast Buster came out for the NeoGeo Pocket Color. This is a system that's exactly like the regular NeoGeo, except that you can fit it in your pocket and it's in color. This is a really cool action RPG where you're shooting down not only zombies, but other Halloween-type creatures as well. Your gun captures the soul of all the creatures that you vanquish. You can then evolve your gun by feeding it. It's all rather weird. Weird but good. There are some puzzles to solve in addition to the action. This is one of the better games on the handheld and highly recommended, though it isn't cheap these days. Dexterity came out on the Game Boy in 1990. This is a tile-flipping puzzle game. Your goal is to flip over all of the tiles to the same shade of gray or green, similar to Cubert. But there are idiot creatures on the board that flip them back because they hate you and would rather see you fail in life. If you flip a tile that's in line with another tile that's already been flipped, all of the tiles between you and that one will turn over. You can use this to stun but unfortunately not kill enemies. This starts getting really tough when there are more enemies on the screen ruining everything. You can also push blocks to reveal helpful items, but keep in mind that you'll have to flip those tiles as well. There's even a multi-screen mode if you really want a challenge. And 2 players can link up with a link cable. Overall, this isn't my type of thing, but check it out if you're a big fan of the company that brought you the NeoGeo. Crystalis came to the NES in 1990. This game came out just as the NeoGeo was rolling out. This is like Zelda if it had more RPG aspects. Basically, you're trying to prevent the Great War that wiped out everything in 1997. We're well into the 21st century now, and no Great Wars wiped anything out back then, so at least one person must have beaten this game and stopped it all from happening. You have experience points to gain levels, towns to visit, and all that good stuff. The controls aren't anywhere near as good as Zelda's are though, but you can get used to them. Imagine if Zelda was entirely on ice. This style of game just wasn't SNK's forte. Still though, this game can be pretty damn fun once you get used to how it all works. There's lots to see and do, and I think everyone should try it. Since the NeoGeo is an arcade-focused system, action RPGs really weren't on the slate. Still though, I really wish SNK would have revisited this game on the NeoGeo somehow. Crystalis came to the Game Boy Color in 2000. This was remade for the system by Nintendo Software Technology, Nintendo's American programmers. The game is very similar, but very different at the same time. It's no longer as slippery for one. The music is now completely different and a bit more primitive sounding. But mostly it's the same game, just redone for your third or fourth favorite handheld. And there you go, that's SNK before the NeoGeo. So what do you think of SNK? Were they the perfect company to create the NeoGeo? Or would you have preferred it if, say, Sunsoft or maybe even Culture Brain created their own hyper-powerful arcade/home hardware setup? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. Hey there, back for another Q&A session. I asked people to ask me pretty much anything on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, so let's just get into it. What games have you spent the most time playing for fun in the past year? Honestly, gonna have to say Street Fighter 6. Was stop motion a passion of yours before GameSack, or was it something you tried because you thought it would be fun and or make your videos stand out? It's been a passion of mine forever. In fact, here's the very first stop motion animation I did the very same night I got a camcorder back in 1992. Wow, that was awesome, wasn't it? No? Okay. When you alphabetize your games, do you put games that start with the in the T's or by the following word? By the following word. I'm not psychotic. Alright, here we have a question from Stika, but to me he will always be ST1KA or St1Ka. He asked, what's your favorite run and gun on the Sega Genesis and why is it Contra Hardcore? I actually answered this very question in an episode several years ago. I compared it to Gunstar Heroes and, well, Contra Hardcore narrowly came out on top. Check out the episode. How many consoles have been refurbished? Do you refurb them yourself? I assume you're asking how many consoles of mine have been refurbished and not just, in all of history. I do refurb some of them myself, and that means like changing out the capacitors and whatnot. I do a lot of that myself. I haven't always done it, but, a fair amount. Those that need it definitely have had their capacitors replaced. Have you reached the stage yet where you pee when you fart or still farting when peeing? Have I reached a what do you mean by that? Is that even possible? Can you even fart while you pee? Let me try that. I can't pee while doing this. Do you look back at past videos you've done and cringe at anything you said or did in them that you wish you'd approached differently? Yeah, like what I just did. Do you wish to ever have an editor, writer, or guest hosts? You've been doing this all on your own, and every creator I've seen do this gets incredibly worn down. I enjoy GameSack and its very technical breakdowns and analyses, but I always think about the creator and their well-being. Why, thank you. I like to have guest hosts on. That's always fun, but as far as the editing goes, no, I'm too much of a control freak when it comes to something like GameSack. So it's kind of like I have to do it all myself. It's just, it's hard to explain. Will you keep doing console aspect ratio videos? I don't know, I feel like I've kind of done all I really want to do with that. I mean, there is still the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox, but I don't know. I mean, there's good lists online for those, but I don't know. We'll see. Have you ever actually used a SAC to take games to a friend's house? Yes, and vice versa. Do you think surround sound for gaming could be improved? Yes, I do. I mean, I don't know why, but a lot of developers just kind of neglect the center channels. Very, very strange that they do that. I don't know. I think maybe part of it might be the hardware. I don't know. Something's not right. But yes, it could definitely be better. They're not good enough yet, but they're close. How long do you think you'll be making episodes for GameSack before moving on? Moving on to what? The afterlife? I mean, if I'm alive, I'm still probably going to be doing GameSack, unless they get like a crazy offer that I can't refuse, like a movie, or, you know, no one's going to offer me that, so I'll be doing GameSack for a while. Why aren't you answering this question? I demand an answer. Because it sucks. You ever played Dragon Power? Nintendo is best game, followed by a bunch of emojis. That's Culture Brain, isn't it? Culture Brain is amazing, probably the best developer ever. In fact, I wish they had made the NeoGeo instead of stupid SNK. Wet wipes before or after conventional toilet paper when wiping? You've got it all wrong. What you gotta do is you gotta grab your ass cheeks and pull them as far as you can, you know, like total goatsy, and then do your business, and then after you're done, let go, they slap back together, and you don't need to wipe at all, it's all fully clean. Can we get an episode of Life After GameSack starring Dave? Well, actually, a couple of years ago, Dave was gonna do videos like on his own channel about him wanting to sell some of his games, and then he'd show some gameplay and talk about the game and then just sell it there. I don't know. He asked for my help and I was willing to do it, but he just never followed through on that. I don't know. Hey Joe from GameSack, this is my question. Have you seen the Game & Clamp show GameSack animation? I have not. Let's take a real quick look.
Anyway, like other types of modding, you need some special tools. Yeah, like this handy dandy bandy baseball bat. Why the hell would you need a baseball bat? That's right, Joe. You're gonna die.
Why'd I have to die? And finally, why is the NeoGeo the most powerful thing mankind has ever created? Well, I think it's obvious that the NeoGeo was created so that we'd have something that we could hold up and use to gloat over the pores. Anyway, that's it for this session. Thanks for sending in your questions. Sorry if I didn't answer yours. Maybe ask a better one next time.